guys, happy Thursday and welcome to my tea time with Narita. I hope you guys are doing well and I hope your week's going well. So I am excited about my tea time today because of a guest showing up, and I'm looking forward to him sharing his story with people who are watching and people who watch after. Hey, and yeah, for anybody else who shows up, if you guys have questions as you're watching it live, or if you have questions afterwards when you watch it, let me know. Shoot me a message, comment below, and yeah, or shoot him a message as well. And for anybody who's watching as well, like live or even after the fact, if you have a story that you would love to share, an experience, an aha moment, a different perspective that you've gained through like an experience or something in life, reach out and let's chit chat. It doesn't have to be necessarily for tea time. We can record it whenever it works for both of us, or we can just simply chat about it over the phone or a text message. I love storytelling and I also love hearing stories. I have such a belief that people are like books. So I love books. And every person has like their own story and we can learn so much from them through their own experiences in life and their own growth and their own pain. So yeah, so I just, yeah, again, if you have a story or if you want to share an experience, an aha moment, different perspective, reach out. So, hey Janet, how are you guys doing? So I'm gonna wait for Michael to show up. So Michael is a men's life coach and he specifies in helping other men grieve and helping other men through their own breakup, healing their own breakup. And yeah, and he's actually on here now, so doing well, thank you. That's good. So I'm gonna have him jump in so we can start this conversation because again, I'm excited for this and I would love for him to share the story. So his story, let's see. Oh, I think you have to request me. Actually, let's see. Right here. Let's see. Okay. This changes.
There we go.
Hey, Michael.
Hello, hello. Hi, Narita. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Doing well, doing well. Happy to
That's
be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to have you on here, and I want to give like a shout out to Efrain because he shoot me a message and he connected us. So I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, me too. I love that friend. We've been a good friends for a couple of years now.
Okay, yeah, I did a tea time with him and a couple of videos with him too, live on Instagram. But okay, so going back, I'm excited to have you here because I saw your page and I got to know your story, and I'm excited to have somebody on this page to share their own experience. And as you know, like through my own tea time, I'm such a huge person wanting to bring people to share their own experiences, their different perspectives in life, like their own growth. So yeah, so a little bit about you, like you're a life coach, right?
Yes. So I'm a men's breakup coach and life coach. I have been doing this for about a little over a year and a half now.
Okay.
And yeah, I actually met Efren through a coaching certification course together.
Oh,
Um,
nice. Okay.
yeah,
That's
and
awesome.
mhm.
Yeah, so I was from your experience, like I saw how, because I want to get to like the core of it, right? Like how do you show up in relationships? And one of the reasons again, like why I'm excited is because we always hear about the ones who got out of like unhealthy relationships and what they had to go through. And you actually through your own experience, you brought those unhealthy relationships or you brought those unhealthy habits into the relationship. So I would
Yes.
love to hear about your season in that space.
Yeah, sure. So I've had three serious long-term relationships in my lifetime. And none of them have been really successful. I've
Okay.
uh, always been the kind of person that it was me versus them. I wasn't able to handle conflict very well. I would take things personally, and I had like these
Mm,
deeply rooted insecurities that kind of made me feel like I had to defend myself all the time instead of working towards a solution that really worked for the best of both of us. But I would say that my last relationship was the one that really kind of shifted my whole life for me. And so in this relationship, prior to this relationship, I used to think of myself as a moral person. I used to think of myself
mm,
as somebody that wanted to do good for the world.
mm.
But I met this woman, and she was very um, she challenged me, my morality in a lot of ways. When I met her, she was still married, and
Okay.
all of a sudden, I was faced immediately with this like difficult decision where it's like I knew I shouldn't, I'm not supposed to. Not only was she married, but she also had a couple kids, and I was pretty young at the time. That wasn't something that I was considering for myself. But I fell deeply in love with her right away. She ended up getting divorced. We
Mm,
started, as we became more serious, I ended up moving in with her and playing the role of a stepfather.
mm.
And so, um, as I started to, step deeper into that role and the relationship got more serious, I found, um, I went on this trip to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, actually right before I moved in. And on that trip, I had this like just slight perspective. I saw this world of what my life could look like, other than what I had signed up for, and I
Okay.
realized like, wow, I could live this life of like traveling full time and
Mm,
like really loved like discovering new cultures. But that wasn't something that was possible for me with the life that I signed up for. And there was also a lot of me feeling like I needed to be a certain person in order to
okay.
fulfill this role as a stepfather, which didn't necessarily align with my original goals in life. So I ended up cheating on her on that trip.
Okay.
And as I cheated on her, years later, I found out that I've also had this thing where I've always been really difficult with having difficult conversations and talking about how I
Mm,
really feel. So I gave a lot of like false promises. I told her I was going to marry her, all the whole nine yards. Um, and I couldn't come to actually tell her that this isn't the life that I wanted to have. So like cheating on her was like in a way an escape, a way to just blame myself as the bad guy, so I don't have to admit that this isn't the life that I really want to have.
mm,
So obviously that created a lot of tension and resentment over the years. It took me a long time to even tell her, and when I finally did tell her, she was obviously heartbroken, crushed, and even more so than I had predicted. So there were a lot
mm.
of wounds that were created during that relationship. Like I mentioned, we also started fighting more and more often, and eventually, after 3.5 years in total, I had finally decided to move out of her house and end that relationship. And so that's kind of what led me to the healing process of recovering from all of this trauma and pain and
Yeah.
difficult, questionable decisions that I had made in my life.
Yeah. It's looking back at my life, sometimes like I'll look at the times when I really, really wanted to do something and that perspective that I had of the should, like how I'm supposed to show up and how much resistance that created.
Yeah,
And because there's like that resistance, there's so many unhealthy habits that kind of have a ripple effect outwards. And it's hard to see it in the moment. Like I don't think in the moment like we want to be this person for that person or we want to be this should, and it's hard to kind of step into our own ground of like nope, I'm going to be this person for myself. So
totally.
for you, like what was the shift or what happened that made you say okay, like I need to break up with her, I need to like separate
Mm.
myself, or I can't keep doing this anymore?
Well, it was really that trip that, like, before that I was, dead set on making this life work, being this
Okay.
man that I thought that I needed to be in the relationship. And that trip itself was like very eye-opening for me. It made me realize a lot of things about myself that I wasn't being fulfilled back home.
Okay.
And that's what kind of really, started the ideas, right?
Yeah.
Of maybe this isn't the right thing for me. And so that was really like I remember like on the flight home, I was crying.
Mm,
I like literally crying. And I wasn't crying because I had cheated on her necessarily. I was crying because I was so sad that I knew that deep down
mm,
this isn't what I ultimately wanted.
yeah. Yeah. I feel like I can relate to that feeling. When you're in a relationship, when that feeling hits, like it's not gonna go away anymore. It's like a
Oh
truth and
yeah.
it's just gonna stay there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there was a ton of resistance, right? Like I went through a
Yeah.
long period of commuting on the bus to work every day and just like thinking about it, replaying the same thing in my head over and over again, going back and forth about what I should do.
Yeah. So I have a question because you've mentioned, and I totally appreciate like the vulnerability and the rawness. Like, as being someone who showed up in that space of lying and cheating, what is like the drive? Like, what makes somebody want, not want, but be in that space to do that?
Well,
I know you've mentioned like insecurity a little bit.
yeah. Yeah. So I think a lot of it for me in the moment, it came down to a lack of experience, a lack of fulfillment in being with different kinds of people and feeling like I didn't have this opportunity when I was younger, and I was like making up for lost time. But I think that was a very surface level reason. I think that there was a lot of um, blaming myself as the bad guy, blaming
Yeah.
myself as the person that um, it's not you, it's me, that kind of thing, where it's like,
Mm,
oh, I'm the one that's bad, so we have to break up because I'm not
mm,
actually capable of being vulnerable enough and telling you how I really feel about this relationship and the direction that it's heading.
okay. That's so crazy, huh? Like I've heard stories before where people rather walk away, and I'm sure I'm in that space too previously, or do XYZ rather than like sit down and have a vulnerable conversation of how we
Mhm.
actually feel. Like
Yeah,
it's like that's more scary than doing the cheating or the walking away or never having this person again in our lives. Right? When we can
right.
just have an open conversation, and if anything, like there's more connection and when there's more unity created in that
Yeah, yeah.
space. Yeah.
And I will say that like I wasn't like, on the prowl necessarily looking for anything. I was bragging about my relationship back home to all
Mm,
the people that I was meeting. But at the same time I was like in this place of where I was just felt like at my top peak, I was
mm.
loving life, enjoying life, and that's how the temptation kind of found me.
Okay. Yeah. So then after like the breakup, like what inspired you to go on this like healing journey or going within? Because again, like I love that space and I love when people are in that space and also like a male, like a man,
Yeah.
because I feel like as a man, there's so much more stigma like
Hmm.
that men grow up with that it's harder for men to like step into it or for them to find others who are in that space as well. So it's like what inspired you to go into that space?
Yeah, well, it was a long process for me to get there in the first place. I didn't even know, like, in my previous relationships, I we went through a breakup. I would be really sad and depressed for like 6 months or so, and then just kind of move on with my life. There wasn't any
Mm,
healing, there wasn't any intentional work done there, and just kept moving forward and like eventually felt better. But this time it was different. I this time I was really confused because I wanted I was living in
Mm-hmm.
the suburbs, which isn't what I wanted. I moved back into the city, got a studio apartment, had this rooftop view of Seattle, like really cool, like all this, like hanging out with my friends again, like all these things that I wanted. But deep down, I was miserable inside. I couldn't, I wasn't feeling any better. I felt incredibly guilty for the way that I treated her, you know, cheating on her, lying, all of that stuff, like
Mm-hmm.
that I had been suppressing for such a long time. All of a sudden, I had to face it because I was by myself. Um,
Yeah.
and so 8 months went by and I wasn't feeling any better. And I was like, what is wrong with me? Like this isn't how, you know, things have happened in the past. There's got to be some way that I can pull myself out of this. And so I started looking into just doing a shitload of research. Like I was just Googling everything, like how to
Mm-hmm.
overcome a breakup, like how to love yourself again, how to forgive yourself, all of these sort of things, self-love, self-compassion,
That's
how to
awesome.
like rewire your brain. Because I knew I needed something because I saw the path that I was heading down and I really didn't
Mm.
like where I was going and the lack of progress that I'd made on my own.
Okay. So it's like
Oh,
this spark
and
of curiosity.
yeah, yeah. And I wanted to add that like in those first 8 months that I was like on my own again,
Um,
I was doing all sorts of things to avoid the pain. I was smoking weed every single
mm,
night. I was a huge addict. I couldn't sleep, so that's what I would use to enable to fall asleep. I would binge eat like almost every single night, eating a bunch of junk food, like anything to make me feel better and give me these like temporary hits of dopamine. But it didn't help anything at all.
yeah. Oh my God, I can so relate. One of my friends just asked me the other day, like, how did you get over your 5 year relationship? And this breakup happened like years ago, but I didn't officially get over it until years later when I found myself living abroad alone. And it just hit one night, like, oh my God, like there's so much resentment and pain that I still have. And I realized just exactly what you said, how afterwards, right after, like I went to drinking, like I took some other like high, like dating, like sex, like all this stuff. And it wasn't until I was tired of those patterns and I was alone when I was like, oh crap, I have so much pain. Like, and it also forces me to like look back to myself within, like, oh, what did I do? Like, not in a way of like blaming myself, but in a way of how did I contribute to being in this space or to show up in this way? Like, obviously, it didn't work for a reason. Like, what are my own red flags?
Right, right, totally,
Yeah, that's
totally.
awesome. That's so awesome. So I'm super curious. So being in this like healing journey, going within, like, and if of course if you want to share, like, what did you find within yourself? Like, was there anything that was brought up, like with your upbringing or like your own relationships with like other people? I know
Yeah,
like there's a because I got into another relationship where I almost got married, and the same thing. Like I walked away, and a lot of the stuff came from my own family of like no boundaries. It's like, oh
yeah.
shit, like that's connected. Like I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I will say that like at first I started out with just doing my own research and I was understanding like that the way your brain works, the it's not like a single source of truth, especially when you're in pain. It's giving
Mm,
you this certain perspective, and you're like in this cyclical loop. So I realized that, you know, I also started getting really into meditation around then. So I
mm,
started getting really into the present moment and just being present instead of focusing on the past and all the negative things that had happened to me. But that research only carried me so far. It wasn't until I actually started working with a coach myself where I was
mm,
able to really start to identify the root cause of like where my behavior comes from. So through working with my coach, I was introduced to shadow work and realizing that a lot of this ties down to like the relationships that I witnessed, which is my parents' relationships, which wasn't necessarily like a healthy model relationship to be on. So a lot of like that fear of vulnerability, fear of like being able to actually express my feelings in a healthy way to the other person, like there was none
mm,
of that going on in my childhood.
mm,
And I also like control is a big thing. Freedom is a big thing for me. I felt very controlled as a kid. My parents were very strict, and you know, they loved me. They cared for me so much. They tried their best, but were very restrictive. I have always had this like desire for freedom. And
Mm.
so when I was in previous relationships, that also played out all the time. Where anytime I felt like I was getting in trouble, quote unquote,
Mm.
for doing something that maybe didn't consider the other partner, but it felt like, oh, this is rejecting my freedom. I'm not able to do what I really want to do, and so I would, you know, that would be a trigger for me, and I would lash out or argue or get upset about that sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah, totally relatable. I know what you mean. Yeah, same. Like I had the life coach and a therapist, and a lot of that stuff came through like, oh, like that makes sense. Like
Yes.
it was a pattern. I didn't even know that it existed when I was younger, and now there's like a whole other way of doing it. And it takes
Yeah.
practice. It totally takes practice.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And I will add that I learned a lot about attachment styles through working with coaches as well. And I realized that I'm an anxious attachment style, and I've always attracted partners that are avoidant, which
Mm.
totally makes sense. And so we would just kind of like repel each other. Every time I would, you know, feel rejected, I would try and, you know, do more, like do something to win her approval, and that would push her further away. And
Yeah.
yeah, attachment
I'm like
styles.
I'm actually avoidant. So it's funny that you're saying that. But maybe for people
Yeah,
who aren't watching, like what are the attachment styles? Like or do you know of them like right off the bat?
yeah. So there's four different attachment styles: anxious, avoidant, disorganized, and secure. So anxious attachment style is when you are somebody that um, I kind of like relate to it. I think of it as like clingy a little bit.
Mm.
Like you feel anxious when you don't receive the love that you want, and this could be as small as like, oh, my partner doesn't want to hold my hand at this moment, and now this is making me feel anxious about this. Um,
Mm.
avoidant attachment style, and I will say that like all of these attachment styles come down from our childhood, what we experience in childhood. Avoidant attachment style is somebody that feels safe. Um, in childhood, they felt safe by not being too loud, not being the center of attention, by pushing things away, and that's how they receive the love that they want. So it all ties back to the love that what we ultimately want. And the disorganized attachment style is a little bit of both. It's both anxious and avoidant at the same time. And so what is secure attachment style then? Secure is when you um, aren't necessarily needing that other person to fulfill your cup, right?
Mm.
You know how to give yourself the love that you need, and this person is an asset in addition to you. And but you feel confident and secure within your own self that you aren't able to, you know, you aren't going to actually um, what's the word for it? You don't need to push somebody away. You're welcoming and supportive when you need to be there for that other person, but you don't have like that neediness factor to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. I've been tapping into more recently how I was the avoidant, where it's kind
Mhm.
of like no attention or I didn't have that space as a kid to process with my family or to express. So it was more like independent and vulnerability would scare me. So it's like, no, forget it, you know, and I would always, the same thing, attract partners who were anxious. And that would make me want to just like, forget it, like, can you go home? Like, leave now. So it's interesting
Mhm.
just being aware of all of it and seeing how they stem or where they stem from and how to build that secure attachment style.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
I'd love to share just from my own
Yeah, of course.
experience. Like,
Definitely.
I think my anxious attachment style really is rooted from the lack of love that my parents showed me, right? Like,
Mm.
they told me they loved me, like intellectually I understood that they loved me, but they weren't
Mm.
close. They especially when I was older, they never hugged me, never like kissed me or like that sort of like closeness. And growing up as an adult, I've always craved that, and
Mm.
I feel rejected when I don't receive that from partners.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure we can all relate. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then going to where you're at now, like you're a life coach and now you're guiding others to heal and go through this process to overcome, not overcome, but go through their healing journey. So what inspired you to make the step to be a life coach specifically in this area?
Yeah, so I've known for many years that I always wanted to help people. Before I became a coach, I was a software engineer,
Okay.
and I really wasn't fulfilled in that role. So I knew that ultimately there was a path for me that had to do with helping people, but I wasn't sure what that would look like. I explored a bunch of different options. I was volunteering in hospice, volunteering in childcare. I explored going back to school, getting a master's, becoming a therapist. But none of those like really resonated with me, especially because like I want to travel and becoming a therapist requires a license in a particular state. And I felt like it goes back to the whole freedom thing. Like, oh, this feels restricting. I don't want that.
Yeah.
So it's been a long process of trying to figure out what that looked like. And I also didn't know exactly how I could help people. I didn't have the life experience yet to be able to truly help people through something really difficult. And then, so, years later, I'll start out by saying, like, when I was exploring being a therapist, that's when I first discovered coaching.
Okay.
Um, but at the time, I was like, oh, I want a secure, stable job. I don't want to start my own business and have to worry about inconsistent money and whatnot. But all these years later, I go through my own like whole like 2 year long healing process. And I learned a lot of like really valuable information that I think men especially aren't really in tune with. And we there's a lot of like societal conditioning that prevents us from holds us back from getting the help that we really need. And I ultimately, like, the reason why I wanted to become a coach was because I wanted to help prevent people from making the same mistakes that I did. I had this whole like vision to combat toxic masculinity and like build healthy relationships. So I don't know how to explain it other than I just went for a run one day and I came back and like when I go on a run I get all these endorphins and I'm really like just all sorts of like creative like intuitive thoughts come to me.
Mm.
And I was frustrated with my job and I went, "Oh my God. I like know a lot about this subject and this is something that I can actually bring to other men." So that's what
Mm.
really like catapulted me and got me into the whole life coaching area. I like literally started doing a bunch of research and signed up for a certification course like literally the next day.
That's awesome. Fuck yeah. Super appreciative that you're doing this work and giving this space for like other men because it's totally needed. Totally, totally
Yeah,
needed. And I can
agreed.
relate to that same space too, where like I also looked into when COVID hit. I was actually living in Vietnam. COVID hit,
Mm.
had to come back, and I was looking into like getting my master's and looking into it. And I'm like, you know what? It just doesn't feel right. Like, as a life coach, and I'm working on getting hopefully certified as a to do like somatic energy work, but
Oh,
it's like
awesome.
it feels like there's so much more depth or also like connection because then you can share your own personal experience, like the rawness of the whole thing. Like so much more. And I'm not trying to downplay therapists either. Like they're great, it's great work as well. But for me personally, it's like, oh, the life coaching and showing up to do this work like this is totally my path, my calling. Yeah. I wanted to ask anybody like who's watching live if you guys have any questions. Give it a moment.
Yeah, I'm an open book. Go ahead and
Yeah.
fire all your juicy questions.
Heck yeah. Let's see. I can relate from parents. That's a good point. Yeah. Grace said, great point. Hey guys. And I don't know his name, but Legburn79 said, men need more men like you to light the way. Thank you. Yes.
Agreed.
Heck yeah. And then Efrain showed up. He said, great conversation, amigos. Thank you, Efrain. Yeah. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, shoot them now. If you're watching afterwards, you're more than welcome to send me a message, send him a message. And let's see, we have a question here. From Not Again Nako. I think I said that right. How would a person know when they are ready to date?
That's a good question. So, and I think it's kind of, there isn't like any one set answer. I would say generally though, you're in a place when you feel ready to date again because you feel like you're in a place where you no longer have resentment towards the previous relationship,
Mm,
and you uh, feel like there's a thing about feeling ready, right? You've made peace with the past. You've learned from the lessons of the past. You've healed emotionally from the things that are holding you back. So if there's like a part of you that feels like, oh, well, you know, I'll give an example
mm,
for myself at least. Like
definitely.
when I was going through my breakup, I also started trying to date again to try and like feel better, and it didn't feel right to me. I still had I was comparing myself to my ex or the new person to my ex,
Mm,
and I realized that I still had like a lot of emotional ties to my previous relationship. So in that case, I would say that's not a good time to be ready to date yet. There might be some work that you still need to do. Um, but if you're in a place where you don't have this like resentment or hatred towards your previous partner, and you feel at peace with who you are, and you've been able to start to regain that confidence that you have within yourself. And when you take care of yourself first, and you give yourself that love that you're looking for from others, that's how you can really create powerful relationships in the future, healthy relationships. Because you don't want to end up in a codependent situation where you're getting your needs fulfilled by the other person and vice versa. That's a recipe for disaster.
yeah.
But when two healthy people that really know how to fill up their own cup, how to make themselves happy, that can be a really powerful, deep, intimate, connecting relationship.
Yeah. I even like to add to that too is like when you decide to, when you're even curious to go back into like the dating space, like asking questions to yourself of what's my intention? Like, why
Yeah,
am I going back into the dating space? Like, is it because I'm feeling lonely and I want, again, like the high that we're talking about? Is it because maybe like I'm curious to meet other people? Is it just for fun? Like, what's the intention? And being super honest with yourself. Yeah, and I
yeah,
like what you said too, like being aware of how you're feeling when you're around the other person. Like, are you thinking about your ex? Is there feelings that are arising, comparison, sadness, whatever? Like, if there's any of those feelings, like it's not ready or it's not the time yet, most likely.
totally, totally.
Yeah. And we have another question. So Grace said, "How would you separate yourself from attachment?"
How would you separate yourself from attachment? It all
Is it?
comes, it
I'm.
all has
I'm.
to be, oh, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say like specifically. I'm assuming in a relationship, right,
Right,
Grace?
right.
Yeah, since
I
that's
think
what
so.
we're talking about.
Yeah, yeah,
um.
yeah. So I would say it all comes from within. When you are able to fulfill your own needs through yourself and through knowing how to get what you need through friendships, relationships, or whatever else, um, then you are no longer attached to that other person. You no longer depend on them to fulfill your own needs. So it's all about asking yourself those questions about like, who am I? Like, what do I really want? What fulfills me? What drives me? How can I give myself that sense of purpose, that sense of direction, that love that I'm looking for, that compassion, the lightness, all of these things that, um, like kind of hold us back when we're feeling like attached to somebody else. So I think that's the key to it is like, what are my needs? How can I actually fulfill these myself?
Yeah.
And it's an ongoing process, but one day at a time,
Yeah.
and you'll get there.
Yeah, I like that. The needs and wants, getting honest with ourselves. I know in that
Yeah.
relationship where I almost got married, there was a strong, unhealthy attachment. And afterwards, I was realizing, like, oh, I needed him to tell me I was beautiful, or I needed his presence to be wanted, to be heard. And that was a shift for me to realize, like, oh, I need to give that to myself. Like,
Yeah.
if I give that power, or if I wait for somebody to give me that, like I'm gonna be miserable. Like I'm gonna be suffering in every relationship that I get in.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, that's awesome. Grace said, "Thank you." That's
You're
awesome.
welcome.
So, there's another question too that I wanted to ask you, which I was also looking forward to asking you, is the definition of being a man. Like, I know that's something that your identity. Like, what was it before, and through this whole experience and doing the inner work, what is it now?
Yes, great question. So before, I I don't know, like I grew up not. My dad gave me kind of conflicting ideas of what it means to be a man. Especially like in terms of relationships, he always said like you have to treat women differently than you treat men. You can't
Mm,
treat them the same way. And so that kind of was like a beginning influence for me. But as I was growing up, and I got into college in my early adulthood years, I this is where I really started to discover like what it means to be a man. And I looked at my father, and I didn't look at him as like an example of a strong masculine figure. So I looked to other people. I looked to like hip hop artists. I looked to, famous people like celebrities, and they're the kind of people that I should follow.
yeah.
And so
If
I
I can
learned,
ask, like, what was, if you would want to share, like, what are like the traits or what was it that you were like, you know what, like, no? Was it maybe
uh,
like the way that he was saying to treat women differently, but it wasn't happening, like action wise, or
hmm,
like an
well,
example, I
so
guess.
yeah, but you're asking about my father, right?
Yeah, or the way that you grew up, like knowing, yeah.
Yeah. So he, my father, like didn't really necessarily like teach me how to do the difficult things. A little bit like too hands off. So I
Oh.
learned, in a lot of ways, like he was kind of lazy, and so like I kind of learned that you don't have to actually try hard. You don't have
Mm,
to, put all your effort in. You have to treat women a certain way. And I kind of like judged him and looked at him as weak in a lot of
oh.
ways. So I, being influenced by the media or whatever influences you at a young age, I realized like that's not the way to go. That's not how I want to be. I want to live
Mm,
this like fulfilled life. My father was also he likes to stay at home a lot. He doesn't like to go out and do a lot of things. And I wanted to have this really exciting, extravagant life
mm,
for myself. So I looked to people that were successful in that. And so a lot of the traits, and I will say I learned a lot. I had no idea how to attract women when I was
mm,
younger. I really struggled with that. And so a big influence of mine was from the pickup artist community, which taught me a lot of good things about how to be attractive, and but it also taught me a lot of toxic things about what it means to be a man. And
mm,
so my definition of what it meant to be a man back then was to not show emotion, always be tough, always be the strong one, always be the leader, be the
mm,
person that is willing to do the difficult thing that nobody else is willing to do, um, and to uh, like that's kind of like the majority of the traits, right? It's
mm.
like just not showing emotion, like
Yeah,
being fearless, and even if it requires numbing yourself.
yeah.
So that was a lot of like kind of what I modeled myself after, and I thought that was like something inspirational to be.
Mm,
Um, and then I realized throughout this whole healing process that that wasn't realistic, and it isn't actually healthy to be that way. So
mm,
now my own definition of what it means to be a man, some of those things are true. I think being courageous is
mm,
very important. Being fearless, being somebody that's willing to have that difficult conversation, being open, being vulnerable, being heart centered, being
mm,
somebody that is willing to step into discomfort for the sake of the relationship or whatever's best.
mm,
Um,
mm,
but it's also being emotional. It's being able to clearly express your emotions, being able to have that difficult conversation that you really don't want to have, um, being able to be a leader in your relationships or in your whatever communities that you're in, when the time is appropriate and
Mm,
there's a need for leadership. And I would say being a man of your word, being within your own
mm,
integrity. If you say something, like follow through with it, because false promises don't help anybody. And integrity is everything. Like you have morals for a reason. This is what really guides you to along the path of where you need to end up going, even if it's a really difficult, even if you're really tempted to make the decision that isn't necessarily um, what's within the highest integrity, but might be the easier thing to do in that moment.
mm. Yeah, I love that. I absolutely love that. A lot of the work that I do is like saying truth or being in that space of truthfulness. And like we're only humans, so if at any point like we kind of go back and it's like how fast can we go back to truth? How fast can we like own up to our own shit? You know? So that's awesome. That's great. Yeah. So is there anything else that you would love to share? And this is a space for you, yeah, to share anything that you would want to, or how can people find you?
Sure. Um, the last thing that I kind of want to leave people with today
Yeah.
is that your greatest pain is your greatest gift in disguise.
Mm,
And if you are avoiding something, and I'll say this, that it's the fear of stepping into doing the inner work, stepping into doing the healing of yourself is a lot scarier than the actual process of it. And the process can be ugly. It can be not fun. But I promise you that from my own experience, at least, you will feel so much lighter. We tend to carry, we're kind of like Santa Claus. We got this baggage we're carrying around with us. And we're just adding stuff to it throughout our lives. And a lot of times unconsciously, not even knowing that this is what's holding us back. And so if you're in a place where you feel like you're not yourself anymore, and you don't even know how to find that anymore. Um, Stepping into the work is how you start to process this stuff. It all has to do with healing your emotions. You got to feel it to heal it. And learning from lessons from the past, rewiring the way that you look at your past perspectives, and fueling that for the future. And when you go through this process of like changing your mind, body, and heart, soul, uh, that is what allows you to reap the benefits of the fullness of life. And so I will just share from where I am today versus where I was.
yeah.
Like I, a little, almost 3 years ago now, I was at like my deepest, darkest, saddest place in my life. And I did not see any way out of it at the time. I didn't even know how to. I didn't even know I needed to heal or what I needed to do at the time. But kind of like I mentioned at the very beginning of this live, I had this strong desire to go travel the world. And that's what I'm really literally calling you guys in from Mexico right now. And
That's
I'm living
awesome.
that dream
Yeah,
of traveling around the world, which I've started back in September.
that's awesome.
So
I was gonna ask you really quick, like, are you living in Mexico now?
yeah, yeah.
Okay,
I'm in
okay,
I'm in Puerto Escondido, Mexico right now. But
okay.
I've been bouncing around different cities in Mexico since January. I started out in Playa del Carmen in
Mm,
end of December, beginning of January. And then I was in Hawaii before that for a few months. And after Mexico, I'm going to be heading over to Cuba and then all throughout the Caribbean. And then I'm going to go back to Central America, South America, work my way down.
oh my God, fuck yeah. I love traveling, so I'm like, yes, do it.
Yeah.
Even with what you're saying, it's so true. I mean, my whole work, again, part of it is stepping into the unknown. Like, we all have like these desires in our hearts, and sometimes they're scary to step into. But it's like once you step into it, it's like with the analogy of like Santa Claus with the backpack. Like, once you put it down and you just like open it, like it becomes, for me in my own experience, like it becomes the vibrant unknown because it leads you to so many places that you never imagined, like to vibrant souls. Like even with this interaction right now, like both of our works, our own experiences has led us to be in this space together, you know, and even like places. So it's awesome that it's like the same, similar experience, similar message of, hey, listen to this desire, listen to this tug, like, step into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Every time you do that work and you step into the unknown, that's how you really start to get yourself back. Your personality starts to
Yeah.
come back. You start getting fueled with ideas and creative. You start to see what's possible again, instead of focusing on the things that make life seem so difficult and so and are difficult. That's a very real experience for people to be living. And I totally resonate with that, and I understand what it's like to be in that place myself. um, that said, I do have one more thing
Yeah,
about
definitely.
relationships too. If you've ever noticed falling into the same trap of relationship after relationship over and over again, and you're meeting the same kind of partners that aren't able to meet your needs, and you're wondering, like, why is this happening? Like, why am I in this vicious cycle? Doing the work is how you break out of those cycles. It's how you start to gain awareness over why you're in this pattern of attracting the same type of people. And it's how you start to, um, when you do the work, that's how you are able to attract healthier partners into your life. And I will say, from my own experience thus far since then, every woman that I've met, in whatever kind of space that has been, I haven't been in a very long-term serious relationship since my previous relationship. But I will say that everybody that I've met, has been somebody that is doing the work themselves and
Mm,
is aware of their traumas and their past and is working towards gaining that deeper understanding of themselves and being able to live happy, healthy lives long term.
yeah.
So, just from my own personal experience, it's amazing what happens when you step into the work yourself. You will start to attract people that really mirror and embody what you're trying to embody yourself.
Yeah. I want to vouch on that because recently, like, I've had that question pop up for myself, like, oh, again, the pattern, realizing there's a pattern and realizing, like, oh, what is it about me that's attracting the same pattern over and over again? And I've had some answers within myself, like when I'm meditating and in therapy, and it's like, oh, again, oh shit.
Yeah, yeah,
And it's an aha moment and it's a realization of like, oh, there's another way that I wasn't aware of before. But again, it starts from within. Like I have to do the work first and then it'll come through. Yeah.
yeah.
That's so awesome.
100%.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm really grateful that we were able to do this live together and hopefully we can do more work together. And again, shout out to Ephraim. And how can people find you? I know you have an Instagram account.
Yeah, so I have an Instagram account. That's my primary way that you can find me. Mindful Millennial Coaching. I also have a Facebook group called the Men Building Better Relationships Facebook group. You can also find that. There's a link in my bio, so go to my profile on Instagram. You can find me there. I do lives and that sort of thing in the Facebook group that I don't do on Instagram necessarily. So those are the two primary sources. If you have any questions, or you're going through a breakup yourself, I'm more than happy to DM me, and I can provide some free value for you and be able to help you out in any way that I possibly can.
Awesome. Thank you guys so, so much. Thank you, Michael. And we'll stay in touch.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Narita. It's been a
Yeah.
pleasure. I really
Thank
enjoyed the
you.
conversation.
Likewise. Hopefully we'll have so many more.
Yes, let's do it. I'm
Yeah.
down.
Okay. Awesome. Much, much love, guys. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for watching.